If you guys enjoy this podcast, I'm going to do that thing that I thought I would never do and say, please, please, please like or subscribe to our show. When you do that, it tells everyone that we can keep making these episodes for you. It indicates that you're enjoying the show, that it's something that's worthwhile for us to do. We love talking to these authors. We love giving you access to these authors, and we love getting inside their minds and giving you a little sense of exactly how they approach their creative process. So, if you feel so moved, please, please like or subscribe to The Bookshelf with Jennifer Morrison. Crysta, thank you so much for doing this interview. I feel like I can't believe we had to have an interview to schedule time to hang out for an hour.
No, thank you so much for having me. I love the podcast and I adore you.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thank you. So we're talking about Normal Family, your memoir. And I just want to start by saying if someone were just, crossing paths with you and wanted to decide if they were going to read it, how would you position it to someone? I know it's different to ask that question to someone who's written fiction versus someone who's written a memoir, but if someone's like, "Oh, I'm thinking about reading your book," what would your like quick pitch be?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so the book opens at my house with a bit of a mystery where I'm in my 30s and I've just invited 2 dozen of my brothers and sisters who I've never met before to my house for what we called tenderly a reunion. And I'm about to meet them all for the first time, sort of like speed dating with half siblings. And then I go back in time to sort of explain to the reader how this crazy moment happened. And really, it's sort of the story. I guess there are two threads. There's the story of me finding out about this larger biological family, and then at first rejecting that, and ultimately coming to embrace them. So there's that. But then it's really, I think, the story of my really complex and loving and wonderful relationship with my mother. She was gay in the 1980s, wanted to start a family at a time when she knew no one who was outwardly gay doing that, and she went on a manhunt for my dad, and he walked into a hair salon and was the most handsome man she'd ever seen, and she asked him to lunch and offered to pay him to give her sperm to have me via a turkey baster. And the next several decades were, I just, if I think it's a story for anyone who loves a memoir about a crazy dysfunctional family where there's ultimately love and forgiveness at the end. So, my mom was a very complicated woman. She was an alcoholic, a drug addict, involved in lots of pyramid schemes. Our life was, full of highs and lows and very boom or bust. It's also 1980s and 90s Los Angeles. So there's a lot of like fun and comedy in that. And yeah, and ultimately just like making sense of what family means, because I had a lot of different family units growing up because my mom would we'd switch girlfriends every couple of years, and sometimes they would come in with their own family units, and so that was changing over time. But yeah, I don't know if that
Amazing
quite
yeah,
hits.
it's a great description. It's also just amazing. To me, it's just incredible your resilience in all of the different situations and like the malleability that you had as such a young person, to just kind of adapt to all of the different households and all of the different circumstances. And I don't know you that well, but the little bit that I do know you, you're just so even, and I was like, maybe it's just because you had so much chaos that you became like the calm in the storm. I don't know. Do you feel like that was a reaction to everything that you grew up around, or it's just that nothing's surprising anymore?
Um, I'm even now, but I wouldn't say that was always the case. So,
Okay.
um, as is the case, I think with like just stories of intergenerational trauma in general, like, there was a lot about my mother's life that I didn't know, a lot of craziness and tragedy and secrets. And I think when she set out to have me, she wanted to do it all differently. And then she wound up repeating a lot of that stuff. And I think I had to do a lot of work to not repeat, all of the, for example, I tell one story of this, but I was attracted to horrendous relationship partners
Mm.
for most of my life. And, I was in this 10-year abusive, crazy relationship. And so I think that so I would probably wasn't even keeled during that. But I did a lot of work to then, ultimately pick someone who's wonderful and loving.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the other
so,
thing that's so beautiful is like, you know, as I started reading the memoir, well, I read this all in one sitting, which people will know from my intro to this interview, but which is rare. I don't use I don't remember the last time I read what book cover to cover, but I got on a plane and I started it, and as the plane landed, I finished it. It was a very emotional plane ride. And I realized, like, when you start reading it, I think that I felt a lot of just empathy for the child version of you, of just like, oh wow, this is a lot that this mother is putting her through. And but then as it goes, you just realize, like, man, she had so many obstacles that seemed insurmountable, like being a gay woman, having a family at that time, wanting desperately to keep a father in your guys' lives, even if it was completely untraditional, like being determined that you got your education, figuring out how to make Christmas special. It was really actually like this beautiful unveiling of how motherhood could be so different to different people and yet be so filled with love.
hmm.
Do you
I'm
know
so
what I
glad that
mean?
came
Like,
across. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just I found her to be pretty tremendous, actually. I thought, man, it was almost like she was born in the wrong generation. Like, she wouldn't,
Hmm.
maybe things wouldn't have been as dramatic or hard if she was just born at a different time.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, a couple readers have said that they reminded her of Auntie Mame or Forrest Gump because she would just wind up in these big, world situations or leading the heads of these cult
Yes.
organizations or pyramid schemes. But then she'd fall down and we'd have to sell everything and we'd go, live in a beat up office building for a minute and then she'd do it again somehow. And she was able to she came of age in this new age sort of, as I said, she was in all these different cults, but she, a lot of those lessons still to this day, she'd be like, you just have to manifest. And somehow she would manifest. And I think that she's a really compelling character. At different times in my life, I think I saw her as all black or white. Like as a kid, I'd glorify her, or then, in my teens and 20s, there was a lot of resentment and anger. And I think growing up, I think any kid who grows up in either a dysfunctional or an alcoholic home, there is that black and white thinking. And I think to be able
Yeah.
to present, no one is black and white. And I think to be able to present a character where, you have shifting sort of emotional reactions to them. And then I hope ultimately come to see her tenderly as you did. I think,
I mean,
yeah.
that tenderness came through your perspective of her, but it really is there. It just makes you think about your own family members. And I think that's part of the beauty of the book too, is that even though I didn't at all have the life that you had, there was something so intimate about what you presented that it feels incredibly relatable. So it was like I could see corners of my life or relatives of ours were on, oh, we kind of had this perspective on this person, but if you really think about it through the lens of what they were going through, you can sort of see it differently. And so I felt like I don't know, I felt like there were just parts of the memoir that opened some of those corners for me with people in our family history. And that's a cool way to go through a book as well. It's good.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad. Yeah, I mean I think that's the power of memoir is hopefully the people who relate. Of course, there are the readers that just are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. That's the most insane thing
It is
ever."
insane.
Um, but I get, I mean, the most wonderful thing about writing the book is that once you put it out into the world, it has a life of its own. And I now get these emails from people all over the world who tell me their own stories. And I think it opens up that kind of sharing and people who had totally different upbringings, but a
Yeah.
lot of the feelings or yeah, the perspectives are similar.
That actually makes me think about another question I had, because I feel like it's interesting, as much as you're an open book, you clearly are, you wrote a book about your life, but like you feel like a very private person. And yet
hmm.
somehow you managed to do this incredibly unprivate thing in such an elegant way. Like, was there ever a point that you were like, doubting that this was the right thing to do? Or like, what was the sort of, obviously it's a fascinating story. No one I know besides you has 35 half siblings from a sperm donor. Like just that alone is fascinating. But like, what kind of was that full push to spend the time to write something about it?
Yeah, it was for some reason I felt very compelled to tell the story from a very young age.
Hmm.
So I the first time, I mean, I had always wanted to write. So growing up, I had like, when my mom was sort of three sheets to the wind, I would write these big elaborate musicals that I would have my sister and her best friend star in.
Oh, wow.
My sister's best friend was also, her mother was also a drug addict. So she and my mother would sit three sheets to the wind in the audience while we performed these big musicals. And like, I had a lot of creativity, I think, from that age. And I loved to just make plays and have my sister perform in them. And then I think I got very insecure. I mean, eventually, like, the things that happened growing up took their toll and I got very insecure. So writing became this private secret thing I wanted to do.
Mm.
But for some reason, when I was 17, there's a scene in the book I talk about, which is originally how I opened the book, and then I ultimately moved it. But I'm living in this sort of rundown office building that my mom has turned into an apartment. And I come home and she's got an intervention, and we learn that she's going to go to rehab for her cocaine addiction. And then I'm left to care for my younger sister. And I think that, and that's when I get into this abusive relationship, and it just becomes just a crazy situation of me being a 17-year-old adult taking care of a little sister. And
Yeah.
but for some reason at that point I decided I was going to write the story. And so I have writings from when I was 17, but I wanted to do it as a film because I grew up in LA, and
Right.
this is how, so I was going to write this as a, like, I don't know, a ladybird or a
It's very cinematic. I mean, I wondered if you ever considered optioning it, or if
uh,
you want to try to turn it into a show or something.
Yeah, so in secret, I worked on it for several years as a script. And then I went to school ultimately to study film, where I continued to work on it as a script. But I had this deep insecurity, so I was writing for many years and showing it to no one.
Oh,
So it was like
wow.
this private thing that I was working on. And then I put it away for several years. And then every couple of years, I'd be like, I still want to tell this story, but I'm so glad. And there were many iterations. So my sister, I was out of school and I was struggling to figure out life, and I was doing other things, and I still secretly really wanted to work on this project. And my sister was like, I just read a book, you have to read it. And it was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's our story. And of course, it's nothing like our story. Like, she grew up, it's completely different, but there were a lot of threads. It was basically, here was this person who had had this totally insane upbringing, who was living sort of this I get was living this fraudulent life, which me and my sister, I think we became so ashamed of
Mm.
how crazy home life was that we worked very hard to present to the outside that none of this was going on. So
Wow.
even though we, had no money, we would scrap together money to go buy used clothes that looked more expensive, and um, we would have ways that people would not get to know us. We would come up with elaborate lies for why friends couldn't come home for Christmas, or like, because we just, so, and so we had this huge amount of shame about what the truth of the situation was. So, I mean, there were boyfriends I had in college who I would date for years who had no idea anything about me. And at the second
Wow.
when they insisted on coming home to meet mom, I would break up with them
Oh my God.
rather than deal with the rejection I imagined would happen when they realized the truth.
Oh
And so
my
I think
God.
that why The Glass Castle spoke so much to me and my sister was because that was sort of Jeanette's story. She had this crazy upbringing, and then worked very hard to have her Park Avenue life, and she ultimately wrote this story. So Caitlin was like, I think it's a book, I don't think it's a script. And so that was sort of when I first, but still I was not in the place in my life, I wasn't truthful with anybody.
Wow.
So I couldn't write it, so it was just I would guess it was a many decade journey to writing the book. But I'm so glad that I did, because I think that I had a lot of healing to do. I think it would have been a very different book had I written it earlier. And also just the plot was still evolving. Not to talk about life as a plot line, but like,
But it was. I mean,
there
I
was
mean,
so
I'm
much
sure it
more.
continues to, but I mean, it definitely needed to evolve to the point of 35 of your siblings coming together. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was something that I wanted to write for a long time, but it really ultimately was in my middle 30s that I was like, you know what, now it's time. I think I have the perspective on it and I've
Yeah.
healed.
And then
And
how do you like where do you start, right? Because this is clearly even just from the little bit of talking we've done now, there's way more stories than what are in the book. So like do you overwrite it like crazy and trim it back, or did you have a sense of structure? Did you find the structures you went, like kind of talk me through what your process was in terms of early drafts of this or the ongoing process of creating an early draft and then getting it to, an editor. Like let's talk from that point.
definitely. So I think, well, there were a couple factors in that. So one was that because I had been working on this for so long and shown it to no one, I realized I was like, I have to get over this. So I was like, so I started having Nick, my husband, who's also a writer, read portions and
Right.
give feedback. And that was a huge step for me because,
That is a huge step. And also the
that is also
scariest step. I'm the
so
most
scary.
scared to give things to my husband. They know
Uh,
us so well. It's like so vulnerable.
Totally. And so, but I went about it. There were scenes I knew had to be in the book. So I wrote those. And then I started thinking about, and structure was something I did overwrite. So there are many chapters, for example, I do ultimately get into my mother's childhood. I had also in one version gotten deep into my father's, but then I was like, you know what?
Oh,
That's a little bit, and they're interesting stories, but it sort of just, it was too much.
yeah.
So it was a trimming back, many drafts versions, but I worked it out in a bit of an outline form. And then I plugged in the pieces that I knew had to be in it. And then I worked around that.
And what
Um,
were some of those pieces? Like give me an example of some of the like have to be in there pieces.
so I knew the scene, there's that scene when my mom goes to rehab and I'm with my little sister and my mom leaves me $20
Oh
on the
God,
counter and it's
yes.
all she's got.
Yeah.
Supposed to get me through feeding our cats and our animals and the
Yeah.
turtles walking across the floor because
Yep. All the animals.
all the animals and then my sister comes home because she was at a friend's and she was embarrassed because um uh, she felt like a burden to them and didn't want to be taken care of. So
Hmm.
I've got this little 12-year-old sister and I'm 17 and she comes home and she's got her stuffed animal and I just feel like, oh my God, I gotta hold it together for her because, and so I knew that had to be in there and I thought that's where I was starting and in my book proposal that's where it started. But then I was like, there are a lot of memoirs out there and one of the things that I think does make this story unique is growing up with the gay mom and then ultimately having this man who's who I came to know as dad because my mom wanted me to have a father figure, but was secretly became the most prolific sperm donor at the California Cryobank. And, finding out that I had all of these siblings growing up all over the US and that we had all these similarities, just the nature nurture of that was really compelling. So I said, I think where do I open is like a cliffhanger. It's interesting. It's very different from what's out there. It's also
Yeah,
something a lot of people are coming, with the rise of DNA testing. Like there's a timeliness element because a lot of people are finding out either that they had a sperm donor and they didn't know it, or they're from an adopted family, but are only now able to find those family members. Like
sure.
what do these biological connections mean? Is it family? Is it not? Like I
Right.
just thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah.
And it relates to larger themes in the book because, of course, every few years I had this other second mom because my mom, was not very monogamous and she would get into these serious relationships for short periods of time. And those women, in many ways, I also saw as my mother. And so
Sure.
I was just interested in these questions. So I thought that was a good way to start. But that revelation came late. And then I knew, I mean, part of memoir is like I was also kind of an investigator into what happened because there were
Mm,
so many open questions.
yeah.
And so I did hours and hours and hours of interviews with a lot of the people involved, my mother, my father. And through that process learned all kinds of parts of the story that I wasn't expecting. And so I knew, I guess it wasn't in researching the book, but late in life, I had found out about this tragedy that happened in my mother's life.
Right.
So I knew I needed to write that story.
Yeah.
And where I placed it, that was a question because I was like, I could start very early on, and the reader would come into the book with more compassion for my mother,
Mm.
having known what she went through. But then I felt like if they've read 2/3 of the book already, they're not going to care anymore. And they're not, so I felt like the forgiveness had to happen later.
Well, and
So
also you didn't know all your life. I
and
mean,
I didn't know, it
what
made
you're
sense to put it
offering the
in
audience or the readers, you're offering them the experience of how you
my
went through it.
revelation.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it
And
was
you
a
didn't
huge
know.
revelation to
Yeah.
like have this woman that in many ways I was my mother's mother, and I thought I knew her so intimately in
Mm.
every way. And
Yeah.
just the fact that there were all these secrets that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so putting it when I've discovered it made sense. But that was actually a revelation to me, which I had read. Reading helps you sometimes solve these structure issues.
Oh, that's interesting.
Um, so I read both a lot of memoirs, which I always loved anyways, and a lot of narrative nonfiction. So there's this book by Robert Kolker, Hidden Valley Road,
Okay.
which is an amazing book. I highly recommend it. He's unbelievable. And it's a story of this family in mid-century America where they were like the perfect family and they had 12 kids, and 6 of the 12 children developed schizophrenia.
What?
It's this epic family drama that's amazing. But 2/3 of the way through the book, he tells you a story about one of the parents that totally changes how you think about them. And
Oh,
so reading that book was the unlock for me of where that had to go.
oh, interesting. And wait, so
Uh,
his book is nonfiction as well?
it's nonfiction. So he was
Okay.
not involved in the story, but
Okay.
he reported it out,
He's
basically.
reporting out. Okay, got
This,
it. Got
yeah.
it.
So this family became like a case study in studying schizophrenia. And,
Jeez.
a whole other thread I haven't talked about is, my father has mental illness, wound up homeless.
Yeah.
So I was personally interested in that story, just to understand the disease. But it's a great book, and the way he wrote it is masterful.
Hmm.
And then there was also, you know, I love memoir. As I said, like Jeanette Wall's Glass Castle, had a big impact on me. But then there were so many like Razor's Edge. I mean, sorry, not Razor's Edge. What's the word? Postcards from the Edge. It's
Oh,
amazing.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Everything she ever did.
Mm-hmm.
Just also to bring in the humor. Like I think that is where I realized, like, a lot of these stories are insane and wild, but and tragic. But I think the reader can only deal with so much tragedy. And I think anyone who comes from a family of tragedy, like there's a lot of comedy in it. That's the only way you survive
That's the
through.
only way you get through as a human being, right? I mean, and I guess that also leads me to a question though of like, was it in interviews with your mom that you were able to get some of the nuance of those moments that you didn't witness? Like when you talk about, her chanting while your dad is like trying to, he's like crying over chicken and she's chanting and trying to get impregnated. And I was like, what is happening? Like, how do you know this? This is so
Yeah,
much weird detail for a moment you definitely didn't witness.
deep reporting, both from my mother and father.
Okay.
So I actually would read the scenes to them.
Oh, wow.
With my mom, I had to tone it down. This is another topic, and maybe I'll talk about that later. But getting my mom on board with the book,
Oh, interesting.
long process.
Yeah.
But because I had been trying to write this thing since I was 17, I don't think she ever believed it would see the light of day.
Yeah.
And she loves, as this benevolent narcissist, there's nothing that my mom would love more than to sit down for 10 hours and be interviewed about her life. Like
Right.
this, literally her idea of a good time. So,
Yes.
I
I don't think I've ever heard that phrase, benevolent narcissist. It's so good.
no, because she's lovable and
Yeah.
she's clinically a narcissist
Yeah.
and maybe bipolar.
Right.
But no, I mean, she's one of a kind. She's an individual through and through. But she loved talking to me. So I would in detail question her, but also I know my mom's lies and her tells. And so I would push her. I thought she wasn't telling the truth. And then my dad, what was interesting is that their stories would line up completely, except in the
Wow.
times when I knew it was something sensitive she didn't want to talk about. And then it wouldn't be my source material for that. But so, because of my dad's mental illness, he's really not very self-aware when telling stories that it sounds fucking insane. So he
Right.
told me the story of you know, the insemination by thinking through dead chickens, like without any self-awareness that this was absolutely insane.
I was reading it. I was like, this is too crazy to make up. Like this, this is just next level.
It's next level. And
If
he
someone,
does it
I
with
mean,
a
if someone
completely,
put it in a script that was fiction, they wouldn't, they wouldn't allow it. They would say like, this is too much. This can't be real, but it's real.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, my father's a whole other, I mean, he's also a comedy, a mix of tragedy and comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but he's living his life and
Is he
he's in
still
India.
in India? He is still in
He's in
India.
India. I support him there, which thankfully costs nothing.
Okay.
But he has carved out a life for himself that is incredibly sweet and unique. I'm not sure if he has any friends, but he has
Hmm.
housing, which is great.
That's huge.
And he spends, he's nocturnal, so he sleeps all day and then he's awake all night
Hmm.
rescuing the street dogs there. And so now he gets kicked out periodically from different apartments because there's too many dogs and it's not what the landlord said was acceptable. But
Wow.
um, he feels like he's like the messiah saving these street dogs in India. And it's very sweet. And
Have
yeah.
you gotten to see him much? I mean,
In
without
India, no, I
getting
haven't.
too personal about it. He's just there. He doesn't come back. He doesn't like,
He's there and he emails me once a month
wow.
with images of the dogs and or the monkeys or
Do some of the other half siblings stay in touch with him, or do you feel like you and your sister are kind of the closest to him because of the way your mom kind of encouraged the some sort of relationship with him along the way?
yeah, I think there are a few who do talk to him. I think others, yeah, I mean because my mother was so set on us having a father figure and had him around for those core periods of time, like I do feel a level of responsibility for him that I don't
Yeah.
think and it's just a sperm donor relationship you have. So, and I also, yeah, I have those I think of him as dad. I don't think of him as a sperm donor. So it
Yeah.
is a very different relationship, I think. But some get a kick out of him and talk to him here or there.
So let's go back to not structure, to craft a little bit. So you're an incredibly busy person. I mean, you have like a full-time job that requires what should require many people to do the one job that you're doing, I feel like. And then you have two children, you're married, you have a husband, you're a wife, you've got all the demands of life. And then you somehow managed in the midst of all of that to also write a memoir. So talk me through like carving out time to write in how busy your life already was.
I mean, it was hard. It was a
Yeah.
lot. It was definitely full on to go back to some of that material. But I dialed back my work a little bit during that
Mm.
period. And Nick, my husband, was really supportive because he knew how important the project was. And I think he could see that unlike all the other times I'd mentioned I really needed to finish this, like I really was serious about it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, you make time. And I feel such like a level of there are so many, I think, people probably who listen to the podcast who have, there are the people like my husband who are professional writers who have been able to just pump out books like it's nothing. And, but then there are others, I think, that have this project that's near and dear to their heart that they just can't complete for some reason.
Mm.
And so I think I was always like, I'd look at Wikipedia pages of like, how old did that person write their first book to like give me the motivation that it was still possible that it would happen one day. And so I am here to tell you, you can be almost in your 40s and write your first book that
Yeah.
you're trying to do since you were 17. But I don't know. I finally felt like it was the time. I finally felt like the story I had a sense of the completion around it. And and it feels so nice. Like I've let it go now. It was this obsession, this thing that gnawed at me. And now it's on the
Oh,
book shelf
wow.
and it's done and it's got a life of its own. And it's really wonderful. Yeah. And I'm
Did
really
you
proud.
feel like that relief came upon completion or upon it being in the world?
Probably it being in the world. I mean, there were steps along the way. Like I just couldn't believe, yeah, that I finished it. And then also having I mean, something I didn't talk about, but I realized at some point when I was ready to write it, I was like, I need a deadline
Ah,
and I need someone I'm responsible to. So I actually decided that I was going to try and get a book deal as a way to hold myself accountable
oh,
to
that's
it.
great. So how did you go about doing that?
So I wrote a proposal. I got intro and with several sample chapters. You know, it's a little harder when you've never written, you have nothing out there to
Sure, you've
show
got to
anyone.
prove
So
some amount of it. I feel like someone at some point told me you need like 150 pages of writing to prove you can do it. Is that what you were told?
I think the story was unique enough at that, you know, now we have more of these donor stories out
Mm.
there. I think that the element of all of the siblings and I don't think I needed quite as much. Like with a novel, I think you need almost a completed manuscript if it's
Yeah.
your first one. But with nonfiction, I think if the story is unique enough, I think I had three sample chapters. I had chapter outlines for the entire book, which ultimately I wound up changing. So I
But
mean,
at least you had something to give them comfort that there was like a safety net, that there was a plan.
yes, exactly. And then I wrote out this um uh basically big finished book proposal. And then I just went to work trying to find an agent that would take on the project. And luckily I got introduced to someone who we had a lot in common. She's this wonderful woman named Liz Parker at Verve. And she's like, I love it. I think we should go out with it. So she went out to a bunch of publishers and this incredible editor at Little Brown named Vanessa Mobley loved it, and she said she put a preempt on it, and
Oh,
I had
wow.
24 hours to get on the phone with her and decide if I was going to go with her, and
Ah,
so that was great in the sense that it wasn't like you have these amazing stories of these books that have been rejected by so many people, and they
yeah.
finally I guess I had experienced all that rejection in other ways throughout my life, but in this one, so I think once I had that book deal and I had a deadline, they told me I had 2 years to write it, so that clock was ticking in the back
Okay.
of my
And they
mind.
gave you that. Like you didn't ask for it. They were clear that that was the deadline.
I think that I put in the proposal that it would be done, and this was all to create a structure around me because
Yeah.
I knew how important it was. But if this was just, I needed like to cash a small check in my bank account, and I needed to have a deadline because then it was
Yeah.
real.
It's so interesting to me because it's like you're such a planner and but you grew up with no structure. And like, so how do you hear these stories of things that people go through, and some people just get completely destroyed. Like some people would have been destroyed by your life. And you were like, no, let me figure out how to solve it and then how to like continue to grow as a person amidst it, and then also look back at it in a beautiful way. Like, A, where do you feel like that comes from in you? But B, was there ever like a moment where you kind of felt that decision of the fork in the road of I could either kind of be just buried by all of this, or I could just choose to keep being resilient and stronger and figuring out how to create these kind of structures for myself.
I think there were many forks in the road and many decisions where I chose like health over sickness.
Mm,
So, the first was in college, I think, where, there was a sense in me that I wanted to survive and I didn't want to be buried by this,
yeah.
but I was also very damaged by my upbringing. There was lots of trauma to get through and lots of behaviors patterns to break. So I think like the first fork in the road was I became anorexic bulimic in college and I had a
Right.
severe eating disorder as a manifestation, I think, of like, when you're growing up in an alcoholic home, you have no control. So here's one
Totally.
thing you can control is your
Yeah.
calories and your intake.
Yes.
When you get out of control, you can stick your finger in your throat and you can throw it up. And I remember, my greatest moment of achievement when I was in that illness was I fit into a pair of pants from when I was 12. And I was like,
Oh my God.
so I was pretty sick.
Oh,
And I was, so I think, and so I had gotten really, and I was starting to drink problematically. A lot of people would say that was college, but it was binge drinking. So I remember I had a horrible hangover. I felt sick and I was 90 pounds and I went into the school. I went into the college, health office to see if I had the flu or something. And started asking me questions about my weight. And for whatever
mm,
reason, there was this part of me, I think, that wanted to tell on myself to like have someone come help me. So I was like,
Mm.
I sometimes throw up. I just threw that out there.
Interesting. You were just sort
And
of
they were
like
like, will you
testing the
sign this piece of,
waters.
will you sign this piece of paper that you'll go to a therapist once a week, provided by the school? And I was like, fine. So I started seeing this woman therapist. And it was sort of my first good experience of therapy. But the interest, like some of the things she said to me were like, I was like, well, let's talk about, at that point, I wasn't even willing to be honest with a therapist about what I had been through. So I don't know how much work I was going to get through there. But she was like, the first thing I want you to do is just go eat a big lunch and not throw it up. And I was like, yeah, but I think we have to go through my trauma first so I understand why I'm doing this. And she's like, no, I actually just want you to start gaining weight. And
Mm.
like, so, and that was a very interesting, like, I think this idea of like doing the healthy action even before you're ready to mentally.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Actually, just walking out the thing as opposed to feeling like you have to fix it all. It's so much pressure to have to fix it all before you do the thing.
Totally. Or like, and so many forks in the road. Like, so I solved the eating disorder and I got through it and I went and I have a healthy relationship with food today, which I'm so lucky about because I know a lot of people struggle with this for their whole life. But I
Yeah,
would say I'm fully recovered on that. Like, I don't have body dysmorphia. I feel
that's
good about my
amazing.
body. It's great. But there were many other things. I still have this problematic relationship to alcohol and weed. I mean, thankfully, my mom was telling me from the time I was 0 that I was definitely going to be an addict. I had the gene for it. So I was terrified of drugs. So I never tried a hard drug in my life because I was like, I know I would love it and I would be an addict.
Oh,
But
God.
still, I was like a binge drinker in college and I would wake up from situations that didn't happen every night, but it was like
Yeah.
I acted differently with alcohol. And so right after college, I was like, oh, you know what? I think I do. I think my mom was right. This is a horrible thing to say, but I think I do have that gene. So then another fork in the road, I decided with some help, I'm going to stop drinking. And
Yeah.
so I've been sober since I was 22.
Wow. That's so
And so like
young to
that was
have that
another fork in the
realization.
road.
Yeah.
But then there were still like, so I'd say growth comes in spurts. Like that was,
Yeah.
I have a beautiful life today. I think so much is attributable just to that fork in the road decision. Because I do think that, there's a lot of research to show how genetic a propensity for addiction is.
Oh,
And as
yeah.
annoying as it is that my mom set me up for that, like, I
At
did
least she
have.
warned you.
Yeah. But then there are harder things to kick, like your attraction to unhealthy people.
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, I
Um,
relate to that. I definitely have I had stretches of that before meeting my husband for sure, like, and I'm sure it comes from in people's lives for different reasons, but I feel like
yeah,
it was, when you look at, especially the relationship you really lay out in the memoir, like, I just thought, man, how did you deal with getting from that to like being happily married? You know what I mean? Like that's a huge chasm of like difference in a great way, but like so many people don't figure out how to make that leap.
totally. Well, I think you get very into the romance of, oh, but this feels so dramatic. It's so Romeo and Juliet, the highs and the lows. And
Right.
you're like, oh no, that's just dysfunction and it's comfortable to you because that's what you're used to. And like it feels icky and weird for someone just to like you and be kind. Uh, but that gets back to that, like doing the like alternate action. Like I had to
Right.
just be like, oh, I'm very attracted to you, but like you just told me that you're a drug dealer and you have a meth problem. So even though I find you incredibly attractive, I'm
Where
not
were you
going to
finding
stay with
meth
you.
dealers, Krista? Like I don't think I could find a meth dealer if I tried.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
right, but then there's healthier versions. Oh, then I'm suddenly okay, I'm saying no to the meth dealer. Like I've made
Right.
progress, but then I find like an avoidant workaholic who doesn't,
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
there's different versions of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then so when you did go, you sort of started to touch on this about your mom coming around to you, putting this out. I feel like your mom, your husband, your children, your sister, there's a lot of people that I feel like all are painted with so much love and so much beauty in the book, but I feel like it must have been tricky conversations with all of those people at some point in terms of deciding to kind of put your life on display. How did you walk through that?
It was a lot. The most I would say was was worrying about my mother.
Yeah.
I I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts actually with authors that I respected or reading what they had writing about people who were alive.
Mm.
Um, how did they decide what was okay to say, what wasn't? What was their moral take on it? Like I was very concerned about how it would be for my mother. I obviously wanted her to read it. I basically wrote a stripped down version that wasn't
Mm.
as bad. Like I took the end result book and I took out a bunch of stuff that I thought was going to be hard for my mom, and I had her read that version as a
Okay.
way in
Like
to
a
getting her
stepping stone.
comfortable.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like a bridge, a little bridge.
And she came home hysterically crying after reading the first page
Oh
with
no.
entire page marked up. And she couldn't believe that I had called her dog Pudgy. And I was like, oh my God, what am I in for?
Oh my God,
Oh my
no.
God.
Oh
Like she
no.
had a mental breakdown about like, I don't know if she had her own weight stuff that she was attributing to calling her pudgy. I was like, Mom, this is a loving, tender word. There's no way other to describe your dog. You overfeed her. She's
Oh,
incredibly fat. So this is the tenderest word, but so I was like, oh God, so I actually thought about pulling the book because I was like, my mom's having a mental breakdown about the most benign page in my book. Like, how am I going?
whoa.
And so we step by step went through the book and I negotiated with her basically about, I was like, that has to be in there for this reason, this reason. What was interesting is the stuff that I was the most worried about, the stuff that I had stripped out of version one, she didn't care about, like her drug use or like
Huh.
her being in a parking lot with her best friend smoking heroin. Like she was like, that's the funniest story ever. We were listening to Steely Dan and like she loved it. She thought it was hilarious.
Fascinating.
she she could not get behind the stories of our economic struggles, like rips in
Mm.
her shirt or where how she was getting by, and she could not talk about the tragedy that had happened with her father. And so but I was like, Mom, those are the things that everyone can relate to and that are incredibly like these are the things that are going to make readers forgive you for some of the other stuff. And
Uh,
um, but it was hard. There were a few months where I was like, maybe I'm not going to publish this book. Like after all of that, I finally wrote it.
oh God.
Um, and so that was really hard. But ultimately, I think she knew how important it was to me, and there was enough of all the other stuff. But like, she also wanted me to add, she's like, when you introduce me, you have to say peace activist. It's like she just had these ideas for how, like,
Okay.
um, I was like, Mom, I'm not going to introduce you that way. That's ridiculous.
My mother, the peace activist.
Um, but, I think ultimately she felt like, I think it fed her narcissism in a way that was positive. Like, I think that there were enough people that read the book and thought she was fabulous and, a trailblazer in many ways for starting this family
She
at this
really
time.
was. I mean, it's just
Um,
incredible that what she pulled off. Like it's amazing.
so now she loves hearing who's read the book. She loves talking to them about it. And like, I think what it was is the same type of shame that I had to overcome, like she had a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so especially about her upbringing and what her real, she had grown up, there was a lot of prestige around her family because her grandfather had been governor of California and her father was this prominent judge. And then at home, he was an alcoholic and it was really dark. And I think,
Yeah.
like I had, she worked to present a completely different exterior than what was really happening. And I think she still had a lot of that. And so it was very hard for her to peel back and that was hard for me to do that to my mother. But I feel like no one likes the pretend version of yourself. And like what is so powerful about memoirs, we all relate to a lot of this stuff. And we're,
Yeah.
um, and I ultimately, there was I had this ultimate feeling, gut feeling that she'd be okay and that it would ultimately bring us closer together. And so
Yeah.
ultimately I wrote the book, but it was hard. And it's
Yeah,
not
that must be
right.
so scary to thread that line for that long, though. I mean, like you've set yourself up to have these deadlines. You've set up expectations to deliver in some way with this very unknown element, which is like, is it going to be okay for my mom? Man, that's, I feel like I would have lost sleep over that.
I did. Yes. I think because the love really, I do think comes through.
Yeah.
I think, and I think she's like one of the great character. I
Yeah,
don't know.
you have a line in at
She's
the end of
one
the
of the
book.
great characters of the
The
Western
Western,
world. Like her
yeah.
story needed to be told.
Totally.
She's
Totally. I mean,
fabulous
and I
and
don't know that you can
amazing.
pioneer some of the things that she pioneered without having that kind of personality. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
you can't just be sort of like a follow the rules, center of the road person and like carve out a new path that has never really been carved before. Like the world needs people like that. Um, yeah, my gosh, I can't imagine the stress of negotiating that. Also knowing that like the end result could be so beautiful. I think that's what would feel so hard. It's like you could see that there was so much love there and that there could be something so beautiful on the other side of it. And to sort of like get someone else's perspective there it's a real journey.
Totally. And hard because my mom was a very controlling presence too. And she's very good at getting what she wants and she can be a bully. So it's also me having to like understand, okay, what do I have to do for me? And like, can she ultimately recover and we can be fine? Yes. I
Yeah.
ultimately decided and I was like, and I have to do this for me. And I think other people will get something from it. And with my sister, the one I grew up with, she was we had both done a lot of work, I think, just to not be so ashamed of this story and not to be
Yeah.
presenting this. But there were a couple things that I took out because they didn't like add to the story in any real way. And on her request, I was like, okay, I don't need to
Yeah.
have it here. And she also added some really great humor in.
Oh, that's great.
Like she'd be like, you have to mention Machu and Pichu, the tortoises, and that one of them is like crossing the carpet while we're being told that mom's going away to rehab. And like that who's going to take care of the animals is like the reason why she can't go. And I mean, she added so much comedy through
Yeah.
her notes.
Oh,
So yeah,
it's amazing.
she
Well,
really championed having the animals in there throughout.
the animals are huge though, and it's such an interesting through line with your mom's love of animals, your dad's love of animals, then your guys' pressure to take care of all the animals, but then your own love of the animals. Like it is an interesting through line that does bring a lot of humor, but also is just like,
Also,
very sweet.
innocent, sweet. Yeah.
Well, we've somehow managed to get all the way through our time already. So my last question is always, do you have a piece of advice that you remember someone giving you at some point in your life that you feel like would be worthy to share with our listeners? It doesn't have to be about writing, just in general.
Something, let's see. I guess, don't be afraid of the truth. I
Hmm.
think people love you. I think you're more interesting and more lovable for the hard things you've been through than for
Yeah,
like the exterior that you present. Also, if you're really dying to tell a story, don't give up on it, but also go live your life and you know, don't make a bunch of sacrifices only to that thing. Like, that I really, yeah, I don't know. Let me think about that for a minute, but
yeah, but I mean,
it's
I think
also Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
right. Okay.
So I remember in psychology reading there's this pyramid, and at the bottom is just the basic needs like food and water and shelter. And then above that is, friendship and belonging. And then above that is like a love relationship. And there are all these, and then at the very top is self-actualization and art. And
Hmm.
I remember thinking like, oh, I have none of the pyramid. And I'm so obsessed with like telling this creative
Oh,
story. And I
yeah.
think that there's something really powerful about like build your life up in a way that's like healthy and sustainable and like you can get to the creative thing.
I love
Um,
that. I think that's so powerful and so so useful, whether no matter what someone's trying to pursue, I mean, whether they're writing or doing anything artistic or just wanting to be a better version of themselves. I mean, that is so true. I think we all kind of can get obsessed with the peak, and you got to build the whole pyramid to get there. You can't just, that's great. I love
Yeah.
that. Well, Crysta, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
just being
much.
so open and honest and lovely. And I don't know if you're ever planning to write another memoir or a novel someday, but if you ever do, we are here for you. We will
Wonderful.
highlight anything you decide to write, or if there's anything Nick wants us to bring on, you should let us know because we would like to keep it all in the family.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my husband's book, American Kingpin's amazing.
Okay,
So you should check that one out.
I
But
will. That's going in my book cart as soon as
perfect.
I say goodbye.
Perfect. Awesome.
All
Well, thank
right.
you so much. I
Yeah.
really I love this and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.